Leaves will Welcome to the first Talk2Connect webcast of the season, the first out of 4 this fall. My name is Lisa Tallroth and I am standing here streaming live from a studio at the SMA in Stockholm, Sweden. And those of you who joined us in June will recognize this 2-part setup that we have, where we first, for 1 hour, will have guests and discussions and films here from the studio. And then after a short break, you all get to be active as we continue with discussions in breakout rooms and smaller groups. This will be the setup for the whole season, all the webcasts we have prepared for you, and to make sure you don't miss out on anything, I think you should register right now. We have the register link in the chat on your right, and this is what we have prepared for you. Today it's going to be about reintegration in West Africa, in October on female migrants in the return and reintegration process, in November on how to achieve economical self-sufficiency after return, and the last session for the fall will be on the EU strategy on voluntary return and reintegration. And I mentioned the chat. This you find on your right hand. This is also where you find a link to register. And during this live session, the chat will be monitored by my colleague, Pernilla. So keep an eye on that. Useful information will occur in the chat. And although this is a live stream, you can get subtitles in several languages. Down on your left side, you'll find a small button saying CC. This is where you click to choose caption in your preferred language. All right, it's my time to keep track of time, and now it is time to start. Different approaches to support reintegration in West Africa. That is today's headline. I'm happy to be your host. My name is Lisa Tallroth, and we have almost 200 participants participating from across Europe and even overseas. We are so happy that you are here today. And let's take a look at the agenda we have for you. First out, to help set the scene, we're happy to bring you Nassim Majidi, a deeply experienced migration researcher and executive director of Samuel Hall. We'll then get to learn more about the French Migration Agency set up for return and reintegration. We're going to follow it through from the suburbs of Paris to Dakar in Senegal, where we also will meet with returnees that only just arrived, as well as those who've been back for quite some time. And then to pick up the discussion in the studio, I have Nassim Majidi with me, and she will join the panel together with Monique Kaba-Binta, who's a return counsellor at the Belgian State Agency, Fedasil, and also Stéphane Darmas, who's director at the French State Agency's office in Dakar. All right, the three of you will, together with a local reintegration support partner in Ghana, AG Care, you will all be able to highlight matters relevant for reintegration in the region, such as health, a need for medical care, social stigma, and the importance of family approval. Just to mention a few things that I know our panelists are eager to talk about from different perspectives. So that's the first hour, and then for the second part we will arrange for all of you to meet your international colleagues in breakout rooms. You're going to discuss a couple of prepared scenarios where the question of health and reconnecting with family will be of relevance, and we will have Joris Kennis, a very experienced consultant within migration matters. He will facilitate the webinar part, and you see how easily that will be arranged. But let me get back to that later, because we have a full show prepared for you, and we better get going. Yeah, first of all, As we all well know, the West Africa covers a huge area, 16 countries and over 420 million people. This region is one of the fastest growing on the African continent, both in population and economy. And in today's webcast, we're going to look into some of the aspects of relevance for European caseworkers and counsellors on return and reintegration. But to start paint the picture, the migration from West Africa to Europe is only a very small part of the migration and displacement taking place in the region. The last years have looked pretty much like it did last year in 2022, with approximately 5,500 asylum applicants coming to the EU. Nigeria is the main country of origin, followed by a vast majority from mainly Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Conakry, Senegal, Mali, Cameroon and Gambia. And the main receiving countries within EU that are Spain, France and Italy. However, this year, as I know you follow the news and you see it in your everyday work, the migration across the Mediterranean has become more intense. Only the first 6 months, the number has doubled compared to last year. I will soon back to the number we're seeing right now. I just wanted to mention that that we have seen a higher number in this last 6 months, doubled compared to last year. And one reason might be the escalating conflict in Niger, which is a large transit country in the West African region. Now let's take a look at the picture that just was shown there. This is on return. That is our focus for this webcast and for the Talk2Connect project. So the number on that is, in the same year, 2022, 3,500 who received an order to leave. And that number refers to people with no permit to stay, regardless of what kind of permit they had applied for. Okay, quite a few numbers to keep in mind as we introduce Nassim Majidi, my first guest, Executive Director and co-founder of Samuel Hall. Do I have Nassim? There you are. Welcome to Talk2Connect. Samuel Hall is well known.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Samuel Hall is well known for our viewers as an independent research institute with focus on migration and displacement. And I would like you to help me put this number we just saw into context. Around 5,000 asylum seekers coming out of West Africa to the EU every year. It looks, given that this is a huge area with a huge population, it looks like a rather small number. What are your comment? What is your comment?
Thank you so much, Lisa. And as always, I like to turn the tables around a bit and take an African perspective on these issues. Now, you mentioned the region. You broke it down very nicely for us on the map with the 16 countries that you mentioned and the population figures. And you mentioned 5,000 annually coming to Europe. If that's what Europe calls a challenge, think about the numbers returning to Africa and what African countries have to respond to. Let me take an example. One of the largest initiatives around return and reintegration was the EU-IOM joint initiative for the protection and reintegration of migrants. So this was a project that took place over 5 years between 2017 and 2022. And in those 5 years, the project led to the return of 118,000 migrants. And out of those, 98,000 had access to reintegration assistance. They came from 13 countries in West and Central Africa. They covered failed asylum seekers, but also migrants who had to return during COVID because they lost their jobs and needed to return home. But also those who were given no legal recourse and were ordered to return, as you previously showed on the slide. So just considering these numbers, the different profiles, and behind each of these are individual migrants and communities behind them, this is the overall picture, and that is the overall challenge. How to ensure that these migrants find a purpose upon return and find what we call sustainable reintegration, which covers economic, social, and psychosocial dimensions. Now, I'd like to mention, out of all of the research we've done, maybe three main challenges here. One is that there's still a lack of legal framework, and reintegration is often still not a subject of legislation. So although we have these very big numbers, in many of the countries where it's returned to, there is not a single legal framework that deals exclusively with their needs, with the returns, with readmission and reintegration. The African Union is trying to move forward this conversation at a continental level. And there are good practices on different countries having set up more normative at their country. But basically, legal frameworks are lacking. And that's obviously an issue in terms of protecting people's rights. The second that I mentioned is the diversity of the profiles. As I mentioned, there are many, and even going beyond the legal categories that I mentioned, are women, children. You mentioned Nigeria, where we have examples of survivors of trafficking who return. And these are individuals with specific vulnerabilities, specific health needs, and also migrants with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. They have specific protection and assistance needs that are often overlooked in return and reintegration programming. And lastly, I just want to come back to this definition of reintegration. Although there's not one common upon definition, the one that's mostly used is the one that IOM has put forward, which really makes sure that we focus not just on economic reintegration, but also on social and psychosocial reintegration. Migrants who are returning to many countries in the region return to labor markets that are informal, or return to rural areas where going back home doesn't necessarily mean a warm welcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're welcomed with open arms by their communities. So the challenge has been that most reintegration programs have focused on access to employment, but that's just one part of it. And we need to ensure that we cover the social and the psychosocial needs. Over to you.
Many challenges, for sure, that you touched upon there, and we're going to get back to them. I just wanted to, this in the beginning, would you say that there are any misunderstandings floating around when we talk about reintegration into West Africa that could be important to highlight right now?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the challenges with reintegration globally, not just in West Africa, is the assumption that reintegration is a one-way process and that it's the end of the migration journey. Actually, it's part of the migration cycle. And really the challenge here and what's really at stake is to make sure that returning migrants can reintegrate and stay if they choose. They're also given the choice to potentially remigrate in legality, in safety, and that they have pathways for migration. So one common assumption is that reintegration is the end of the journey. It's not, and it shouldn't be. The aim is not to anchor people in areas of origin where they may no longer feel like they belong, but it's also to provide mobility as a strength, and the experience of mobility and being perhaps also utilizing networks in different locations as an asset for their own well-being and for their own lives. So I think this is commonly one of the most common assumptions that we need to work around. Another common assumption is that most of the migration is urban, or meaning most of the returns happen to urban areas. And yes, there's definitely a pool for migrants to return to urban areas where there is more access to services and the likelihood of jobs. At the same time, what COVID-19 has shown us, and we published a report with the FAO, is that many went to rural areas during the pandemic. And there's a very interesting trend there in West Africa and their rural communities.
Yeah. Sorry, your sound cracked up a bit there, but we will get back to you and to these topics since you will join the panel discussion in just a bit. So I thank you for now, Nassim Majidi. because now it's time to travel a bit. An all-inclusive approach, that is how the French Migration Agency, OFI, describes their take on return and reintegration in the West African region. This means that the returnee is getting support through the whole procedure, from pre-departure counseling in France to French staff working closely with local service providers in country of origin. My colleagues in the Talk2Connect team, they decided to follow the French return route to better understand the all-inclusive concept. And they started at the local office in Bobigny, outside of Paris. Let's take a look.
Le dispositif d'aide au retour propose en fait à tout candidat, à tout étranger qui souhaite retourner dans son pays, un étranger en situation irrégulière ou pas et qui souhaite renoncer à son statut, propose en fait un accompagnement administratif.
Voilà, je parle avec eux pour leur dire s'ils ont leur décision. Voilà, si surtout c'est des pays où il y a la réinsertion. Ça veut dire ils vont pas. C'est pas un échec pour eux d'être ici en France. Ils ont pris de l'expérience et ça va être positif pour eux arriver chez eux dans leur pays.
Le service voyagiste opère en fait à l'aéroport et donc prendra connaissance du dossier et programmera le vol et nous transmettra en fait le billet. Donc une fois le billet reçu, un nouveau rendez-vous est donné au candidat qui prendra attache avec le bureau retour où son voyage sera préparé.
Je m'appelle Arnaud Caron et je travaille à l'Office français de l'immigration et je m'occupe des retours volontaires à l'aéroport. Je m'occupe des tâches administratives ici au bureau, la création des vols, de mettre les dossiers sur les vols et de préparer les vols pour partir à l'aéroport avec les codes, etc. Donc pour aujourd'hui, j'ai récupéré les dossiers, j'ai vérifié que tous les billets correspondent bien au dossier, les noms, les prénoms, et j'ai récupéré les enveloppes avec les codes pour également vérifier que tout concorde avec les dossiers. Et j'ai sorti le trombinoscope avec les numéros de téléphone et les photos des personnes qu'on va réceptionner à l'aéroport.
Hello everybody, I'm Rashid Ali. I came from Pakistan in 2019. I applied here for asylum, but unfortunately my case is rejected and seen in court. So that's why I took decision to go back to my home country. And I spent approximately 3.5 years in France. You know, before when my case is rejected in France, I was so disappointed. But when I meet with the OP office, they give me a good advice. If you want to go back to your home country, so we can help you. You can open a business there and we will help you. So then I took decision. So it's a good opportunity for me to go back to my home country and make my own business.
Ok, donc là on attend la dernière personne, enfin la famille qui est en train de s'enregistrer avec les bagages. Une fois que la famille s'est enregistrée, on va faire le point pour vérifier que tout le monde soit bien ici, bien présent. Et après avec le groupe, on va partir à la police aux frontières pour faire la vérification des passeports, puis après la salle d'embarquement.
On a eu 12 passagers, pas de soucis particuliers. Un n'est pas venu, donc c'était vraiment un vol très très calme et très rapide. On a été très très vite, sans souci.
bienvenue au bureau de l'OFI à Dakar. Laissez-moi vous montrer comment ça se passe. Donc, mon rôle en tant que conseillère retour et réinsertion à l'OFI est vraiment d'accueillir le Sénégalais de retour. Donc quand il arrive à l'OFI, je suis la première personne qu'il voit. Et lors de l'entretien, il est important de définir ce qu'il a déjà fait en France, ce qu'il veut faire, ses compétences. Donc c'est vraiment d'établir le profil de la personne pour qu'on puisse adapter l'accompagnement et avoir un accompagnement sur mesure pour que sa réinsertion soit réussie. Donc nous avons plusieurs profils de migrants de retour, de Sénégalais de retour. Et selon les profils, nous avons donc des réactions qui diffèrent. Mais la plupart des Sénégalais que nous accompagnons et que nous recevons sont confrontés au regard de la famille. Donc les familles souvent ne comprennent pas pourquoi la personne est revenue au Sénégal, pourquoi elle n'est pas restée en France, et ce qui peut causer beaucoup de stress. Donc sur ça également, nous avons tout un accompagnement sur le volet psychosocial, et la famille tient un rôle important dans la réussite du projet de réinsertion.
Alors aujourd'hui, nous allons valider des projets de migrants de retour, des projets économiques ou des aides à l'emploi qui vont bénéficier à notre public. Alors ça fait longtemps que nous suivons et que nous accompagnons des migrants de retour dans leurs projets.
You should have your family support and you should know the business environment. And so that's where CIF Africa help a lot. The people who failed on the business was not really very convinced because they come because just they want to come or maybe they have an opportunity to come, but they was not very convinced. But the one convinced, they work hard and very often they succeed.
Alors on va commencer dans 2 minutes le comité de sélection. C'est un comité de sélection des projets des migrants de retour que nous accompagnons sur la centaine que nous avons à peu près chaque année. Ce comité a lieu tous les 2 mois. Et nous avons, avec des partenaires sénégalais et français, la tâche de regarder l'étude en profondeur, regarder le business plan en particulier, accueillir les porteurs de projets eux-mêmes qui sont accompagnés par leurs opérateurs de suivi, qui vont les aider à expliciter un petit peu leur projet.
Je me sens moins stressée parce qu'au début j'étais un peu stressée, mais là ça va. Disons que je suis un peu... C'est comme si j'avais un poids qui est redescendu vraiment de mes épaules, donc ça va, je me sens bien. Franchement, ça s'est super bien passé. J'ai eu vraiment un accompagnement du début à la fin, que ce soit en France ou au Sénégal. Ça a été vraiment... ils ont été là du début jusqu'à la fin. Je ne me suis pas sentie à un moment donné perdue parce que je n'avais pas assez d'informations ou quoi que ce soit. C'était vraiment un accompagnement, un suivi vraiment topissime. Je veux aussi contribuer au développement économique de ma ville. C'est ma ville de naissance, ma ville de toujours. Créer des emplois et je vois un avenir, disons, radieux où j'espère que ça marchera vraiment. Je suis assez confiante.
À première vue, à la première approche, les retournés pensent que c'est une question de financement. L'approche de RRF, c'est d'associer un ensemble d'acteurs dans un processus qui dure au minimum 1 an pour leur permettre d'avoir accès à plusieurs services. Au début, ce n'est pas évident, mais à la fin, ils se rendent compte de l'important, avec la formation, l'accompagnement, la présence d'autres acteurs, et ils ont accès à d'autres services qui sont utiles pour la réintégration.
Je me sens bien parce que ils ont validé mon projet. Voilà, je suis content. Mon projet consiste à ouvrir une boutique alimentaire à Kolda. Pourquoi j'ai choisi? Comme je vous l'ai dit, moi je suis né dans le commerce au fait. Quand je suis né, ma famille, tout le monde vendait quoi en fait. Mon père, lui était commerçant, ma mère aussi. Mais ça y est, je suis venu, j'ai trouvé ça quoi en fait. C'est comme comment on appelle ça? C'est comme, en fait, j'ai trouvé ça dans la famille quoi. C'est comme un patrimoine quoi. Je sais pas, un patrimoine on dit.
Avec l'accompagnement que nous mettons en place, les migrants de retour ont beaucoup de chances de réussir leur entreprise. Donc il y a beaucoup de secteurs qui choisissent l'agriculture, le commerce. Il y a des difficultés liées à l'entrepreneuriat. Maintenant, avec l'accompagnement, ça les aide un peu à surmonter ces difficultés-là pour arriver à réussir leur projet.
Donc nous avons besoin de travailler avec les partenaires sénégalais qui aident à la création d'entreprises, qui aident à la réinsertion de leurs compatriotes. Et nous avons aussi besoin de travailler avec les partenaires européens qui ont chacun, selon leurs priorités, des dispositifs pérennes ou plus souvent de courte durée, rattachés à des fonds européens pour faciliter cette réinsertion. Nous devons travailler avec tous les acteurs dans l'intérêt de la réinsertion du public concerné.
Yeah, like you just saw, the returnees we met at the office in Dakar, they had only just arrived, returned back to Senegal. But the team went to Tiaroye market outside of Dakar to meet with Mamadou Sall, who's been back from his return from France quite some time, and he got help to set up a shop selling clothes.
suñu mbokk yi amuñu dara donc pauvre léegi ma dem pour ma dem am dara andi ko dimbale njaboot yi ak mbokk yi ko waaw j'ai malade j'ai feebar dama koy feebar après mu def opération am nga def na opération odo fu mu toll nii suma tax gu baax rek baaxul suma odo bi même oto yi nii su ma duggee oto yi su ma demee sa oto bi yëpp dama am problème foofu benn sama xarit tubaak Vilia moom foofu la nekk sama xarit la yàlla moo ko boole moom bëgg na ma rek fu ma bëgg a dem moom ma jël otom yóbbu ma après ma taxaw waxal ci waa ji bi def yëpp lu ma war a def moom def après moom dama am yurum ci man quoi léegi nag nee na comme noonu la kañ dem comme ni doo nga am problème odo seddaay bi lu ma méttee ni ak yenn lu ma mel ma ne ma xaaral ma dem Sénégal dem ñibbisi ko après ma dem foofu mu ngi sant ko mu dem foofu mu ngi sant ay waa ji quoi après moom expliqué ma yëpp lu ma war def naa ko moom comme lu ma war a def naa ko man lu ma war a liggéey def naa ko mais amul benn problème voilà. ok xam nga njaay man yàgg na si njaay xam naa njaay moo tax ma choisir pour njaay bii Sénégal yëpp da nga ko sot rob moo tax moo choisir bi pour ma jaay pour nit yi mu ñëw war a jënd pour war a sol ça va maa ngi si affaire bi de maa ngi si affaire bi si 6 heures la war a jógee kër ma ñëw ba 21 heures xam nga maa ngi si affaire bi maa ngi door a ñëw fii ku ma gisoon rek dama am kaan xam nga kii bant gis nga bant ni pour wàcc aéroport ni problème avant du ma dem ni ku ma xam rek soo gisee da nga koy jooy mais ak léegi du benn xam nga yàlla lu ma def kenn xam mais man kese ko xam nga liggéey il faut nga am moyen soo am moyen même soo xamee yoon du def mais xaalis moo def yëpp lii soo gisee lii ay xaalis la su nekkoon aussi man du ma def lii amul xaalis boobu mais léegi nag man mën naa liggéey mais soo amul xaalis du liggéey waaw maa ngi si affaire bi maa ngi góor rek maa ngi liggéey soo ma xëyee ma liggéey 21 heures soo jotee ma wàcc ma dem sama kër suba kat ma ñëw man rek.
Bon, moi, à mon avis, c'est parti pour être une bonne réussite. Vu les résultats qu'on a eus, donc quand on faisait le rapport, on a fait le compte de résultats qui est excédentaire et d'après les perspectives de développement qu'il veut faire, moi je crois que c'est parti pour être une bonne réussite. Mais quand on a fait l'évaluation mi-parcours, on a vu qu'il a réinjecté presque près de la moitié de plus que la subvention qui lui a été octroyée. Donc là, je vois que c'est une bonne dynamique. Parce qu'il a pu réinjecter ses recettes dans la boutique et ça fait au total le montant qu'on lui avait remis est la moitié de cela. Donc je suis très fier de ce qu'il a fait et vraiment j'ai bon espoir de la réussite de ce projet en âme et conscience.
From the market to another part of Dakar, because for another former migrant, Mamadou Sene, he chose a different path to restart his life in Senegal, and we'll meet him in his village Thiès, where he got help to buy a piece of land.
Ouais, la limitation du terrain, c'est 1 hectare. Oui. Et demi. Mais là, on a pris la moitié. Voilà, on a pris la moitié et on a fait toute cette zone, voilà, pour cultiver du bissap. Voilà. Oui, je suis parti en France juste pour chercher du travail. Et du coup, je suis resté là-bas environ 9 ans. Oui, 9 ans. Et mon séjour en France... j'avais des boulots de gauche à droite et ça ne me suffisait pas. Et du coup, je me suis dit, voilà, pourquoi pas le retour au Sénégal. Mais hier, on a récolté une très bonne quantité, presque 10 kilos, quoi. Ouais. Et là, aujourd'hui, on a récolté presque ça, c'est 2 kilos, quoi. Ouais, c'est 2 kilos, quoi.
D'accord. Et c'est juste,
c'est juste cette partie. Ouais,
et combien de fois tu peux récolter?
On peut récolter la semaine, on peut récolter 3 fois. Hein. Ouais, parce que ça pousse vite.
D'accord.
Ça pousse vite, ça pousse très vite. Bon, je touche du bois. Vraiment, actuellement, c'est un bon projet que je tiens. Déjà, c'est une petite chose, mais les années à venir, vraiment, je veux grandir. Je veux grandir, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, avec le gombo. Je veux agrandir ici et voilà, faire... beaucoup de choses. Pourquoi des papayes dans l'autre côté? Voilà, là où on a mis les bissap, pourquoi mettre pas beaucoup de papayes et tout? Voilà, agrandir, mais voilà, agrandir tout quoi. Là, ça, c'est des citrons. Voilà, les citrons, il y en a un peu partout dans le champ. J'ai presque 84 pieds, quoi.
84 pieds.
84 pieds. Ouais. Et là, on récolte petit à petit, quoi, parce que il y a des uns qui ont poussé un peu plus, quoi, plus tôt, quoi. Et il y a des autres qui sont poussés un peu plus tard. Okay. Voilà, et là, du coup, il y en a, voilà. Moi, difficile, je dis pas. Le début, ça a été un peu difficile parce que j'apprenais sur Internet, tu vois. Sur Internet, j'apprenais les cultures, comment ça se passe et tout. Mais pour les mettre sur le terrain, c'était un peu difficile. Mais avec l'OFI, on a eu des formations. Des formations de culture, de tout. Après, c'est ça qui m'a vraiment ouvert la tête et ouvert les yeux. Et du coup, ça a été très bien après la suite, quoi, dans le monde. On l'a fait tout au long du champ, tout au long. Et au milieu. Au milieu et tout au long. Ah ouais. La clôture, quoi. Oui. On a mis sur toute la clôture et on a mis ici. Ça sert du brise-vent, ça sert de fertiliser la terre. Et voilà, ça nous sépare aussi nos cultures, quoi. Voilà, on sait qu'on est là. Oui, ma vie ici et mon séjour en France, si je les compare, je dis celui du Sénégal, il est meilleur, quoi. Voilà, parce que je vis, je suis responsable, voilà, de tout ce champ. Je suis responsable de moi-même. Là-bas, on me disait fais ceci, fais cela, et là, je suis tranquille, quoi. Voilà, pas de contrôle, je suis bien, quoi.
From Senegal back to the studio, where I like to welcome our guests for the panel, for the discussion we'll have now. Monique Kaba Binta, you work as a return counselor at Fedasil in Belgium. Stéphane Darmas, we recognize you from the Dakar office in Senegal. You're director for the office set up in Dakar. And Nassim Majidi, you're back, researcher and executive director at Samuel Hall. And very welcome, all of you, to Talk2Connect. I'd like to start with you, Monique, given that your work is on the pre-departure side, usually, and now looking at a few returnees in Senegal. What are your thoughts? This is the other end of the journey.
Yes, welcome to everybody. Like we saw in the different presentation, the reintegration is really important for the people who are in Europe and want to go back to their country of origin. And we have another vision in Belgium, because in Belgium, for us, the most important is the pre-departure counseling. Because during the pre-departure counseling, we give all the information and we try to be clear and to clarify all the things that they have in their head. So we give information about what will be the reintegration. We ask them if they already have a little bit think about the return, if they know what they are going to do, if they already take in touch with their family there in the country of origin, and if they feel really good and better with the decision that they are taking. After that, they have another interview with our colleagues of Caritas of IOM for the reintegration, during which they can take contact with the colleague in the country of origin, and they can explain maybe what they want to do. Because I can say that I know a lot of the West African country because it's a part of my origin, but the real situation at the moment can be different. So that's why we try to connect the person who wants to go back with our colleagues to be sure that everything will be clear, and because we really want to be sure that the information that they will receive will be the good one. Maybe they left the country, I don't know, 5 years ago, and in 5 years everything can change. So we really want to be sure that they are going to take the good decision and they are going to choose the good micro business who can be a real possibility for them.
And in the film, we heard about the importance of family support and reconnecting with family. And I know that you recognize this from your counseling, but can you tell me a little bit more? I know that you even call it the key factor. How do you approach this?
It's different because everybody is different, but yes, it's one of our keys. So they have to take contact with the people that they left in the country of origin. That can be the family, that can be the friends, but someone. Because if they go back and they are alone with nobody who can help them, with who they will feel free to do everything, to speak about everything, it's not going to be easier. And it's nearly not possible for them to reintegrate correctly in the country of origin.
And Nassim, out of a researcher's perspective, what are your thoughts on this, saying that family support is a key factor for successful reintegration? Is that confirmed when you have a larger material?
Yes, and again, where the family comes in is at various levels. So, for example, we conducted a study on the levels of debt, because migrants actually borrow to be able to migrate. So when they come back, in our study for IOM, for example, we found out that 72% of returnees, we interviewed them in various regions of the world, including West Africa, have borrowed to finance their debt. And when they come back, 92% of them still have to repay some of those debts. And where the family comes in is that in situations like, for example, in Ghana, we found in rural and peri-urban areas that returnees had to collateralize loans with land. So they put their house land, their homes, their households' livelihoods at risks if the debts went unpaid. So not only do they need the family's support, but there's family assets, family connections, family networks that they need. So the family is essential, but is also potentially at risk if reintegration fails. So that's why programs really need to take into account not just the individual returnee, but the whole ecosystem around them, with the migrants' families being a central part of that question.
And I know, Stefan, that you really look into this ecosystem as well, and your analysis is on all the levels of context. But you have one context that you call the human context, that you pay a lot of attention to from OFI. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that and why that is so important?
Thank you for inviting me. Well, we have been working in West Africa for 15 years right now, and a little bit in Tunisia. And we just have to admit that we have more or less the same profiles. I mean, this is a plural. We have where we are in West Africa, we have in OFI, I mean, 4 types of returnees. You have young people who left because they had a dream and they wanted to start an experience. They went by boat, they went by plane, they went on foot sometime. It was not easy at all, as you can imagine. And some of them just realized that it was not the El Dorado, and they decided to come back quite a few months after they arrived. That's the first group, I would say. And this is a risky one, because if you are in Tunisia, for instance, this group can come back and can go back to Europe if they really want to. The second one, this group is about 15% of the public we have in OFI. It depends on the country, of course. The second group is what we call the 40s, people, 40 years old men, most of them, who just could not get a residence permit and stayed 10 or 15 years in France without getting this authorization. And at the end, after this whole time, decided to go back to their own country, most of the time called back by their own family. They decided to go back because the father died, or the family was calling them back. And that's it. So most of the time when they come back to their own country in West Africa, it is their own decision, because they didn't manage to get this residence permit. The third category we have in OFI is the category of students. We have a lot of students, especially in Senegal, but not only here. And I'm talking about young people who did not manage to complete their studies and didn't find a job afterwards, or maybe chose not the good studies to be able to work afterwards in France. So they decide to go back. Sometimes they are full of hope. Sometimes they just don't even talk about the fact that they didn't get their resident permit. And they have ambition. Doesn't mean that the project will be better, but they have ambition. And we have a lot of this category in Senegal. It's about 40% of the people we take care every year. And the last part is what we call in Maghreb Shibani, that is to say the old migrants. Some of them decide to return, and sometimes it's after life in France, because they would just want to find back their culture, their family. Sometimes it's because, like in Senegal, they left when they had already 60 women, most of them in Senegal, and decided to, with a tourist visa, to stay in France and take care of their grandchildren, for instance. After 2 or 3 years, it's unbearable, and they decide to come back. So that's my point. You have to distinguish the types of returnee you are dealing with, because if you want to help the people, you have to take care, of course, of the context, the family context, the social, psychological, economical context, and it differs, of course. If we are talking about one or the four categories I just spoke about.
There is not one size fits all. I understand that, and I'm thinking, different approaches are being needed, but I'm thinking of those who fear facing their failure, or what they feel have been a failure with the trip going to Europe. So I wonder, as a counsellor, Monique, how can you approach that fear of returning, being maybe rejected or being criticized by your family? How do you approach that situation? Sorry, I think we have some sound coming in. Is that what you're hesitating about? No, we do hear you,
no,
Monique.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I cannot say that we have a specific approach, and that's the approach that we use for everybody, because all the cases are different. But for us, the social support is the most important. So we are going to work on first. So to ask people to take contact with the family, and then our colleagues will also take contact with those families to be sure that they know the situation. We try to be honest with all the parts. So we try to explain the situation in which the person is living here in Belgium. And if there is some medical problems, we try to explain it to the family. To be sure that if the family say yes to the person, that answer will be the same when the person will be back. To be sure that they are not going to change their mind, because that can be too difficult for them or something like that. We never know. So we try to be clear with all the parts, and we try to reserve a clear answer to be sure that the person can really go back to that place. And if it's not possible, we are going to try to find another solution.
Well, let's hear from another counsellor. She works on reintegration in Ghana at the service provider AG Care, who works with both Caritas and Frontex. I spoke to her earlier, and she pointed out health issues as a major concern. And let's listen to what she said.
Some of these returnees also return with, health issues. And then once they reintegrate, the officer reintegrates them, they use most of the budget to, take care of their health. And when it happens that way, their businesses will also suffer, because the reintegration package, if you are using it to offset medical costs, and then also to set up business, it would be enough. So most of them spend their reintegration budget on medical bills.
Yeah. And then there's nothing left for their livelihood, really. But so this is a complex situation. And tell us a bit about what you as a service provider can do, and how do you work on this? What services do you offer? What kind of support?
Okay, so when we receive a client, or when we receive a referral from our partners in Belgium that there is this client that is coming from Germany or any other, places. First of all, we assess, or they give us, a detailed assessment of how this returnee is, if the returnee is vulnerable. The returnee is vulnerable. So we already put that preparation, in place. And then we let the returnee also understand after their arrival that, look, this is how much the budget is. So in order to really guide such returnee to really, come up to face whatever challenge that he or she has, we give them career guidance. So when you were in Ghana, we try to find out what you were doing already before your migration. So we look at that pattern and see whether it is possible for you to go back to that, kind of economic activity. And most of these returnees are artisans, So some of them have a beauty care, skills. Some have, trading skills and other things. So we look at, the skills that you can offer, and then we build on it to really help you to reintegrate well.
And I can hear that you've been traveling to Europe and seen some of the EU perspective on this as well. Do you have any thoughts on how the pre and post departure could be better bridged in this process?
Okay, I think we've been raising these issues over and over. Anytime we have the opportunity. But of course, yes, for the pre-departure counseling, it's very, very important and is key to the returnee and then to the local, partner as well. Because if the returnee, before departure, returnee already have enough information about, the package that is in store for them, about the services that they will be provided at the end, before their departure, and what the services stands out for. If all these things are, given prior to their return, which I'm happy most of the member states are doing, but for some, it's a bit difficult. So if the difference is that if the person have the pre-departure counseling before return to the country of origin, their reintegration is really successful.
Yeah, Wilhelmina Frimpong-Manso from AG Care in Ghana, and she mentioned the matter of poor health and the insufficient means to cover both medical care and managing livelihood. I'm turned to you, Nasim Majidi. I know that you have looked into the relationship between health and reintegration and how these two are connected. And can you tell me a little bit about what research has found?
So it's quite simple, and I'll put it in the words of one government stakeholder we spoke to who said, our migrants leave healthy and return with illnesses. And it's true. In our 6-country research for IOM, we found that the vast majority of returnees had left in good health and were coming back with health needs that couldn't be met upon return.
Oh, sorry, you're cracking. Yeah. Sorry, you're cracking up, Nasim. I'll hope to get a better line to you. And meanwhile, I'll turn to Stefan, because we saw, we have a bad connection with Nasim. Sorry, Nasim, I will get back to you shortly, but I saw, because you cracked up your line. But we saw in the film, Stefan, the returnees, one had some health issues he mentioned, but otherwise that wasn't really the major focus on this, on their stories. I was thinking how have you overcome the fact that so many returnees have a poorer health returning to a home of origin than when leaving?
Actually, yes, we have the same situation. We have the same problem. Maybe we underestimate this situation, but actually, thanks to this kind of program, RRF, we can focus on this aspect. And we started just to realize that we couldn't take care of this medical problem ourselves. We need providers for that, and that's why we decided to try to detect. This is not so easy. You have to get training too, even among your staff. And then we start a partnership with a very specialized structure to be able to send, with their, of course they have to agree, people to start trying to deal with this psychological aspect. The medical aspect on itself, we have some money for that. It's not a lot. It's about 400 euros, but most of the times we can give this money in addition to the other subventions, and the returnee can just try to fix some medical problem he had when he came back. But as I said, most of the time the people decided to come back. But most of the time they didn't have a residence permit, so it was not that easy to get to find a doctor and in France.
Sorry, Nassim, you were interrupted there because of the bad connection. But you were saying, and I have seen your report, so I know that these two are really closely intertwined, health and reintegration.
Very closely. And as I said, oftentimes the healthcare services in the countries of origin are not equipped, and that's where the development response comes in, because beyond talking about reintegration support, we really need more large-scale development support and development partners to come in to reinforce the health systems that are not equipped to answer to the needs of returnees who've suffered, as I mentioned, labor exploitation, abusive practices, some were in detentions or in camps. But I also want to come back on another issue. We've spoken a lot about different activities for reintegration. We've heard the words successful reintegration from the case manager. But how do we know whether reintegration is a success? Who measures it? What are the indicators we use? And if we don't have that conversation, no one can be speaking about sustainable, successful reintegration. It's actually a shame, because the EU had funded IUM over several years to start collecting data, to start to have longitudinal data across the world among returnees in various countries. And we were starting to get to the point where we could start seeing trends in reintegration. That data is essential. Without that data, anything we'll do will be about different activities, but it won't lead to the outcome of sustainable reintegration. So we really need to make sure that any reintegration program also has a monitoring and a learning component attached to it. IUM has developed a framework, a reintegration sustainability survey. It exists, it's there, and it's time that different governments, actors, implementing partners use it so that we can actually compare data across programs, across countries, and start learning really what works, what doesn't, and how can we do better.
Yeah, you all represent different perspectives here. I mean, that is, of course, out of a researcher's perspective. I'm thinking for you, Monique, who meets with returnees on a daily basis. It's really much a situation in front of you, and I do want to get back to the health factor. How big is that of your, you'd say, of the counselling you perform and trying to understand the health situation of the returnee and how it can be looked after? Is that...
Yeah, yeah. In Belgium, the health situation is, we are dealing with on a different side, because we have a specific program for people who are big, I cannot say big, with more health problems. And we have a basic grant that we can give to people who have medical problems. So it depends a little bit. It depends first, because, you know, when you are in interview with someone, today, if you say that person, that can be a normal person, and if you see him 3 days or, I don't know, on the afternoon, that can be another person. Because with health problem, we never know if that specific problem it's a psychic problem or something else. So we try to have more counseling with the person, to speak a lot with the person, to really know if that's a person with medical problems. And then we try to send the person to a medical service who can provide us medical attest. With the medical attest, we can know which kind of support we can give to that person and which kind of program that we have we can use.
All right.
So it's always different, yeah.
So that is part of the preparation on the pre-departure counseling and preparing for the journey.
Yeah,
I see. Yeah, you know, I will have to end this conversation right here and now because we're going to move on to the webinar part. But you have if you want to give us a short takeaway, I would be happy to hear it. I know that you all have so much to share, but if it's going to be something for the European councillors watching now, what could that be? I start with you, Nassim.
On our end, I've made the point on monitoring, and that really is the biggest element, is you have to be able to track the impact of the work that you do. We did a comparison a few years ago between different countries that were using the case manager approach with those that weren't using it, and it showed that there were benefits to having case managers or mentors accompanying returnees. We need to bring that evidence forward because funding might decrease and might stop to some of these activities. Right now, there's a tendency to think about reintegration packages given to returnees, but that's not enough. What we need is accompaniment over time and to learn from it.
Yeah.
So for case managers, I think my message would be, for the migrants that you work with and for yourselves as well, be able to track evidence of what you do, and there are available tools online, and I'm happy to help anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you. And Monique, do you have a short takeaway? I'm afraid we're running out of time.
Okay. So what can I say really quickly to the counselor is first to be aware that each files are really different. So be patient, take time to speak with the people. Don't do that like a really counseling like you have with the policy. It's really a form of conversation that you can have with those people and try to really explain the situation in the country of origin. And if you don't know about that, don't hesitate to contact the colleague of the reintegration to have more information.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't know. You don't have to know everything for yourself. You can go look for information as well. Any last takeaways from you, Stefan?
Well, about the advices we could get to the counselors, I just would say to be honest. To be honest with them, to explain exactly what the situation they are waiting. They're waiting for them when they come back. You have to prepare, of course, the link with the family. You have to know exactly where you go back and the context, the institutional context. It's not that easy, of course, but you also have to try maybe to develop a small microeconomic project, but a formal one. That's very important. We can't help people if we don't follow this rule with the local authorities here, the formal economy. This is really possible to do that. And we have to give hope to the people, to the returnees we help by doing some real projects, even if they are microeconomic projects, real one with employment.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
It is the real world we are living in. So thank you so much, all three of you. Nassim Majidi from Samuel Hall, Monique Kaba-Binta from Fedasil in Belgium, and Stefan Darmas from OFI in Dakar, the French Migration Agency. Thank you so much for joining us here today in Talk2Connect. Now, friends, looking at this, we will take a short break. Then we will reassemble in another meeting where we can have breakout rooms. And the link for that meeting you find in the chat. You know, on the right hand side, you have a chat and you find the link for the webinar meeting that will start in only a few minutes. I will say goodbye for now and pick up in the other meeting together with Joris Kennis, and we will have the breakout rooms there. I hope there will be no misunderstandings on this. In that case, you can stay and you will get the information in this meeting as well. But now change by the link and see you shortly at the webinar.